Alright, hello YouTube, how y'all doing today? I got a special guest on here, which is the creator of boat parts and the new internal combustion engine mod for Kerbal Space Program. So here is Mike, or InfiniteDice, as some of you may know him. Going to talk about his plans for the mods.
Hey everybody.
So basically, what gave you the idea for the internal combustion engine mod?
Essentially, it had to do more with boat parts originally. I wanted to have a diesel engine in one of the boats, and I wanted it to drive a propeller. Of course, that was an idea I hatched a long time ago, and it really didn't come about until after I had finished release 3, and I was supposedly in my modding off time, and the idea kind of just sprung up on me, and I started writing things down, and then I just started making a module, and that's how it began.
So if I remember correctly, the boat parts mod contains a nuclear engine to power the boats.
Yeah, really it was quite a simple solution to a problem that kind of plagued the boat parts, was the fuel that it took to actually power the carrier. And when I released the original carrier parts, which was R2, the range on the carrier, the fuel for the carrier itself was taking up a lot of internal mass, and the range on the carrier was fairly large. I believe it was over 10,000 kilometers, but when I released R3, it was a lot easier to just run it and not have to worry about the fuel load, and just worry about the tasks that a carrier would perform, and primarily launching and using aircraft.
Well, instead of developing a whole new engine and fuel system, why didn't you just lower the density or lower the mass of the fuel the nuclear engines took?
The amount of power, and again, this is for release 2, the amount of power that it took to to actually go through the water at that time was massive. So the engines on the carrier, I think, were putting out in the order of 10,000 thrust just to move the carrier, and there were about 3 or 4 engines just to move the carrier at between 30 and 40 meters per second, which is fast for a carrier, of course. But again, trying to balance playability with realism is tough at times, and I decided that a 30 to 40 meter per second speed for a ship would be fun, but not too crazy. Trying to strike that balance. Now, for to generate that much thrust, you need to have a lot of resource mass because of the standard code that's used for the engines made by Squad. You need quite a lot of resource mass to burn with air in order to actually generate power. So that's why the resource, the amount of resource was still high, regardless.
Okay, well, I think we spent plenty of time on the whole engine topic. Let's switch gears a little bit, and what do you plan on doing with the ICE mod in future updates?
Well, following release 1 will be updated again once 0.23 comes out. So I believe that will be this Tuesday. I'm going to be scrambling to update everything I have at that time. So, but release 2 for ICE, I'm looking at adding a few more features for the current implementation. I'm thinking of adding carb freezing. So you're going to need to turn on carb heat if the carbs start freezing up. That'll be interesting. It's really difficult to pinpoint when carbs actually freeze. If you were to read online Wikipedia or whatever about carb heat, you're gonna see that it's at times when altitudes change quickly, and if the engine is running hot, there's a certain recipe for that, that increases the probability of carbs freezing. And since the release one ice engine is a carbureted engine, it should suffer from that, and I haven't implemented that yet. So I will be implementing that. And another good thing about the carb heat is it'll actually bypass an air filter. So if you're flying across the ocean or whatever you're doing, and your air filter gets jammed somehow, you can actually turn on carb heat, and that will bypass the air filter. So that's one idea, one thing I want to implement for release 2. Another thing that might be coming in release 2 will be land vehicle engines. So I already have a working implementation for a land vehicle engine, and basically what you do is you put an engine on your vehicle, and then you have to put a transmission on your vehicle, and then finally a drive wheel on your vehicle, or multiple drive wheels. So the way I have it working right now, you can have multiple engines driving one transmission, driving multiple wheels, and that will be, put it this way, it's pretty darn cool. The transmission allows you to shift manually through the gears, reverse, neutral, and as many forward gears as you give the transmission. You can change the gear ratios in the transmission, and you can change the final drive ratio for the gearbox, for the differential. Sorry. So there's going to be a lot of options there. I just have to flesh it out. I have to make a few models, and I have to clean up a couple textures for it.
Well, I think that'll be very useful compared to our current, idea of rovers in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like what I'm trying to do with this is I'm trying to actually build something that's component kind of oriented. So instead of having a one part, fixes everything kind of thing, I'm trying to say, here's an engine. This engine's going to, generate power. The power is going to be transmittable to another part, which is going to then multiply it through virtual gearbox. Then it will be then transmitted to a part that can actually turn. So on the same note, what I want to do is I want to build a very large naval diesel engine, and that will then go into a gearbox, which will reduce it so that it can go out to propellers that will be on the outside of that you can place on the outside of a ship.
It sounds like an amazing plan you have for the mod. So what do you, what are basically the current best uses for the ICE engines at the moment? Because I found them to be kind of lacking power.
Only uses, right? They do, and that's simply because KSP engines are overpowered. Now, if we take a look at Snow's fire spitter parts, for example, if he's going to be releasing, I believe Tuesday with the upcoming 2.3 release, he's going to be releasing his World War I biplane parts in their final form, and my engine works perfectly with his stuff. So if you want an engine that's authentic, I wouldn't say authentic. If you would like an engine that is a lot more realistic in terms of power output than another engine that already exists, then the ICE engine is going to fit directly with that. Being that both stock KSP jet engines and even fire spitter part engines are overpowered, and even Snow would agree with that. That they are slightly overpowered. If you take a look at the kind of air speeds that you're reaching, and those are in meters per second. No biplane is going to be hitting 200 meters per second. So if you take that into consideration and also takeoff distances, you'll see that what we need is a lot. We don't need so much power. More so, we need better design. We need better wing design. So I think that even with reduced power, these things are great. And another thing with the ICE engines and why they're the purpose and the use for them. Um, I've flown a lot of missions, and I've flown a lot of long distance flights across the ocean. I've flown from carriers. I've done so many carrier landings and takeoffs. And one thing that I found was, when you're up in the air, there's really nothing stopping you unless you screw up somehow major and you crash, or something else happens. There's nothing once you're in the air to prevent you from flying. So one of the overall goals of ICE was to basically add that element of surprise, or add that element of uncertainty. When I take off from the KSC and I'm flying across the ocean now with ICE engines, I'm half worried that I won't make it to the island sometimes. I'm half worried that I might not even make it across the ocean on a 4-engine aircraft. So that uncertainty, that sense of fear, I guess, is something that I really wanted to implement. And on a side note, that opens up a whole new area, which is maintenance.
Okay, well, speaking of the whole maintenance side of the engines, today I was messing around with the engines, and I read something on the user manual about over revving the engine, and
Right.
I seen it was, if the engine turns red, back off the throttle. So I'm, taking off with just a basic plan. It's got a wings, an engine, and 2 fuel tanks, and a cockpit. That's it. I take off, and I'm flying towards the island runway, and I'm only doing 80 meters per second, and the engine turns red, and I'm at 60% throttle, and I'm thinking, well, what's going on? Something can't be right here. I'm going so slow, and it's saying I'm over revving the engine.
Yeah, well, the engine has an RPM limit. Let's just pretend that the throttle in KSP represents from 0 to 100% of that engine's thrust. Okay, with ICE, the throttle does not represent 0 to 100% of that engine's thrust. In ICE, the throttle represents 0 to 100% of that throttle lever's range of motion. But at maybe 50% of that throttle's range of motion, you're going to hit the RPM limit of the engine. So what you have to be aware of when you're flying with ICE is, how far can I push that throttle up until my engine starts to over rev, because every engine is different. So when you see that red engine, and as I put in the user manual, what you can do on a takeoff, or at a time when you need extra power, you can use that full thrust, that full throttle, or as much throttle as it'll take, and for that brief moment, it won't do any damage to the motor. Only excessive and prolonged over revving will cause an overheat situation, which will then degrade the oil.
And once the oil is degraded, you have to stop by one of those the service station parts that you've included in the pack, and it'll repair it, I assume.
Yeah, well, what will happen is, let's just say, like, you're flying to the island. When you take off, you give it full throttle. The engine, glows red. You over rev it. You overheat it a little bit. It does a little bit of damage to the oil. When you're flying towards the island, maybe you're doing some acrobatics. You decide to push the engine to its limit a couple times. You do a little bit more damage to the engine oil. By the time you land at the island, you might have a small reduction in the amount of in the quality of the oil that's in the aircraft. If you're very cautious and you have an oil station nearby, you can have a Kerbal EVA and replace that oil and change the oil and make it new again. That will bring the quality of the oil back up, and you'll be good for another flight. There's two different stations. The oil station can do oil changes, which is the oil maintenance part of it all, and the service station, or the repair station, which can actually repair a seized engine.
All right, and I just have one last question, honestly, that I've listed so far, and that is back a couple, I don't know, months ago probably, You mentioned in the boat parts thread about naval weaponry, and you posted a video that demonstrated a pair of battleship cannons being used to propel a plane forward. What is the progress of that weapons pack?
As I've mentioned in the threads quite recently, what the weapon systems are a very complicated and deep mod that I've been working on for quite some time, quite a number of months. Um, and as any modder will tell you, you get into a project and it's your idea of what you want to achieve changes over time, as well as things change around you. The game is actually changing. Version to version, the game is changing around me. So what happened is my original vision for the parts slightly changed, and I wanted to add slightly more depth and slightly better usability. So what that's done is it's delayed the progress of it, but I do work on that daily, and it is progressing quite well. I have it now where you can have an aircraft on the runway. You can have a Kerbal walk up, and he can actually reload or load bombs directly onto the plane from a choice of different ordnance that's available. As long as there are enough ordnance or ammo points on a vessel nearby to actually pull those to generate those weapons, you can load those weapons onto the aircraft. The aircraft can then take off, do a mission, turn back around, land on the runway, and the Kerbal can rearm the plane again. So there's no need to actually go back to the KSC and start a new flight ever again. You can have a persistent aircraft that can be, the guns can be rearmed with the ammo that they require: 30 caliber, 50 caliber, 12.7 millimeter, 30 millimeter, whatever you want. And the bomb loads can be completely rearmed on the runway, and you'll never have to start another. Like, you can maintain the aircraft, you can rearm the aircraft. So there's and of course you can refuel the aircraft. So there's absolutely no need to actually restart the aircraft unless you have physical damage to where parts are missing, and it's not flyable anymore.
So, Deadly Reentry uses a system of parts overheating and getting damaged. And if they're damaged, a Kerbal can EVA and repair the damage. Do you plan on adding a system like this?
Yes, that will be almost like a phase 2 for the weapons. So phase 1 will be physical implementation, meaning the bombs will drop, they will hit targets, they will damage them according to their speed, their impact velocity, and and other effects that I have included, which basically are splash damage, like blast waves and stuff like that. The second implementation of weapons will basically be any of my parts that have like the carrier parts, the boat parts, any aircraft parts that I release will be specially tuned or have a receptor module where when the weapon comes and impacts that weapon, when the weapon comes and impacts that part, it will actually notice that that was hit by a weapon part, and it will actually do a calculation to determine if it's going to be damaged and how severe that damage would be. Again, that kind of system I basically had working a couple versions of KSP ago, but now since my ideas have slightly changed for it. I realized that I can probably do certain things in a better way, and that's why I'm kind of changing my path a little bit on that. But it will have a more advanced damage system than the parts there or the parts not there. That's one thing. I love Romfarer's missiles. I'll be the first to tell you that I thought they were amazing when I downloaded them ages ago. They were the only real weapons that you could get at that time. There was the DYJ gun, of course, but one thing that I didn't like about the wrong fire missiles was the fact that when it hit, it basically just said, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. Anything within its sphere of destruction would basically be destroyed. So having a situation where the parts are either existent or non-existent is kind of you can tell by ice that and by everything else that I make, I don't really like something that's that clear cut. So my implementation for the weapons, for first release will be, here are weapons, they drop, um, they scream when they fall, and when they hit the ground they explode, and they look pretty cool, and they will, if they hit something, likely destroy the things that they hit. Will there be a very detailed damage implementation on the first release? No. Second release will likely start the process of having parts that are hit, basically, or parts that load in the game with a certain module attached to it. So if you have a vessel, perhaps that is a aircraft, and you were to put the InfiniteDice damage module, tiny little part, onto that aircraft, it would then iterate through or jump through that entire aircraft, all of its parts, and add a module that would be a damage receptor. So basically, it would then tally or look for impacts from the weapons that I release, and damage things accordingly.
Okay, so Squad announced on, well, this past like week, for example, they announced that they're going to implement multiplayer at some point for Kerbal Space Program. So basically, though, with all your mods combined that you're currently working on, you could very easily have just an all-out war. And
Now, of course, the parts they specialize. My parts specialize in one thing. There's a common, I guess, undertone to all my parts, and the one thing that I like is skill. So I don't want to create something that is automatically doing anything. So I don't want to have a missile that you fire from something and it automatically hits something else and game is over. I want these things to be skill related. So all the weapons that I'm going to release, you're going to have to practice and to hit things with, and I think that that's the way it's going to be fun. If it's lock on, shoot, and you're dead, there's no fun in that for me. So the way I'm building things is, I mean, by all means, if you want to use other mods that make it a lot easier to hit, then you can do that. But for me, it's more it's more fun to take up an aircraft and drop a couple bombs on it from the seat of your pants, and just, if it hits, wow, you just hit something, without any help, and you took it out. And that, to me, that's pretty cool. Of course, you're going to have a wide variety of ordnance. So right now, I'm looking at, in the very basic sense, I'm looking at normal dumb bombs, which you just drop. There's going to be cluster bombs that fragment at a given altitude and become multiple bombs, little bomblets. There's going to be retarded bombs, or bombs with drag that deploy. So not parachutes per se, but mechanical wings that open up. You can check those out. They're quite common. You can find pictures of those online. And rocket pods with non-guided, just shoot rockets out the front. And all types of guns. So any kind of gun you can imagine will be able to be created and use the module. So in everything I make, I try to give people examples of what it's capable of. That's why with ICE, I released a generator motor, and the generator motor runs just like the ICE propeller engine. It doesn't give any thrust, but it generates energy, and it can recharge vessels within 40 meters. So that's kind of cool. And when it comes to the weapons, it's going to be quite the same way. I mean, that's why I developed, or I made a battleship gun, solely because I'm like, well, I can make any kind of gun. It really doesn't matter what kind of gun it is. I have a system where I can tell it how big the projectile is going to be. The ammunition is going to have this much mass. So also, not only do you have to account for the actual weight of the gun, you have to account for the 1,000 rounds of 7.62 you're going to put in there as well. So everything tallies up in the end for the for mass. So yeah.
So, alright, YouTube, there you have it. Interview with InfiniteDice, the creator of boat parts and the ICE engine, talking about his future plans. Thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you best of luck with your mods and developing them the way that you would like to, and the way that the players would like to, have them. And thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing those pictures that you guys have seen during the video with known on the internet until now anyway. uh, Basically, thank you for everything, and I guess I'll talk to you later.